Okay, so let's talk the oldest story in the world. Literally, it's the story of Noah and the flood. This is the most ancient story ever told. Every culture has a story of a flood, a great flood that comes to wash away everything bad and ugly and evil in this world and give the world a reset, a fresh start. And that is a lovely way of talking about a completely horrific story. Now, not that we haven't done our best to sugarcoat it. We really have, haven't we? We've turned Noah's Ark into a children's nursery theme. We put Y's on the ends of words and we sing cute little songs about floody floodies. We make little, we tell the story with cute little plush animals. Yeah, but make no mistake about it. The story of the flood that comes and wipes out humanity, yeah, that is one horrific story. It's the story of destruction of people. But make no mistake about it, this is not a story about people. It's not even a story about Noah. It's a story about God. It's the story of a devastated God who poured everything into this creation, created a good creation, and gifted it to the humans God created, only to have them choose evil and violence over this wonderful gift. Now, if you have ever poured everything you had, all of your energy, all of your heart and soul into another person, into a job, into a community, into an organization, and had those gifts rejected, then you just a little inkling of what God was feeling. If you've ever created a wonderful work of art that you were so proud of, only to have someone stomp on it and destroy it, again, just a little inkling of what God was feeling about the world and God's good creation at this time. But this heartbroken God was not quite ready to give up on creation. You know, God created something out of nothing when the world was created the first time, and God could have done that again. But this time, God decided not to start with a completely blank slate because there was still a remnant of good in this world. There was a remnant with which to start over, and the name of that remnant is Noah. God calls Noah to this insane task of building a ship on dry land, of gathering two of every species on God's green earth to put into the ship that's on dry land. But Noah's more than just a shipbuilder. Noah's more than just a zookeeper. Noah is a preservationist, called upon to preserve what is left of God's creation. Now, are you aware that Noah doesn't even talk in the story? Yeah, if you thought there was a conversation between Noah and God, that's because of something you read in a children's Bible or a children's story somewhere, because in the actual Bible, Noah never talks. Doesn't ask questions, doesn't talk back, is just obedient and does what God asks Noah to do. And for his obedience and his dedication and devotion, he gets to spend 40 days and 40 nights on a big old boat with a bunch of animals and I'm sure some really disgruntled relatives. And you know that after 40 days and 40 nights in a boat with that crew, by the time it was all over, Moses was probably so exhausted and so claustrophobic, he probably didn't even care that he'd been saved. He probably wished he hadn't been. Until finally the rain stops and they're able to open a window to probably what was the freshest of fresh air that ever was, ever. And then started the day after day of sending bird after bird after bird out. And finally one came back with a twig, which meant that there was some dry land. Now you know that Noah was so freaking excited to put his feet on terra firma. But I bet that was short-lived. Can you imagine how overwhelming that would have been? After the exhaustion of the 40 days and the 40 nights with the relatives and the animals and all that entailed, to step out on this blank slate. If you have ever tried to write anything and been staring at that blank page, or if you're an artist who's been felled by a blank canvas and just didn't know what to do next, again, a little bit of an inkling of what Noah must have felt like after the euphoria of having feet on terra firma left him. Yeah, it was a blank canvas. Gonna have to start all over again. But again, this is not Noah's story. This is God's story. And God made a promise. God made a covenant, not just with Noah, but with people of all time, with you and me, that this would never happen again. And God left a sign that we still see today, the sign of the rainbow. And in that covenant, God doesn't say this will never happen again if you do what I say, or it will never happen again if y'all just get along with one another, or it'll never happen again if y'all just come to church every Sunday. God said, I will never do this again. This was God's covenant with God's people. You see, God's promises do not depend, thank you, God, on what we do or don't do. This is God's story. This is where God takes a stand to show us that our God is a God of second chances, a devastated God, and a God who wreaks havoc and devastation, but a God who gives creation second chances. And this happens early on in our Bible, not too far into the very first book, the book of Genesis. God takes a stand, makes a promise, and keeps a promise and we know that God keeps this promise because it happens again and again and again, where the world turns away from God and turns toward evil and toward violence. And at some point it gets so bad that God's heart breaks completely in two and pours out in the form of a baby who is both fully human and fully God. This time, the God of the flood, the God of the rainbow, the God who keeps promises, this time, God chooses incarnation instead of devastation. And now this story that is God's, this God story also becomes our story because we are invited into it. We are invited to be co-creators with the maker of all things. The story of the flood is a hard one. It is an ugly one. But it leads us into this story arc where we learn that our God is one who keeps promises, a God who becomes one of us, a God who is with us, and most importantly, a God of second chances. So the next time the storms of life are raging and you think you may be drowning in the floodwaters, remember that our God is a God who keeps promises, and a God whose love and grace and promises do not depend on what we do or don't do. This is God's story, and we are invited to be a part of it.